1, 2, yeah. Hi, everybody. We're having a great time. Woohoo! Yeah. Coming up next on Rugby Wrap-Up, Major League Rugby Talk with Alex Corbisiero, Dan Power, and Bryan Ray. Yay. Rugby Wrap-Up brought to you in part by The Pig and Whistle, the world's best rugby pub, and Lean and Limber. Stretch your way to a healthier lifestyle. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Rugby Wrap-Up. Matt McCarthy in Midtown Manhattan, the epicenter for the COVID-19 virus, but it doesn't matter. We're talking rugby, and we're talking Major League Rugby, and we've got some huge stars to talk Major League Rugby with, including Mr. Dan Power, Double Dan, Double D Dan Power, calling in from Denver. Mr. Bryan Ray, office dog slut in Nova Scotia, and, drum roll please, Alexander the Great Corbisiero calling in from California. Gentlemen, let me welcome our friend from the far north first because he was the last one in on the call. Bryan, good to have you back.
I'm disappointed that my pre-roll video wasn't good enough, so I figured I'd show up live for you just this one time.
What are you talking about? This is a bigger appearance.
That's true. Bigger demands, though.
Yeah, tell you what to say. So, Alex, before we get to Dan, who's basically going to help us guide us through the ins and outs of the virtual MLR in our first part of this show, I want to welcome you, and good to see you looking healthy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great to be here. Yeah, very healthy. I think it was last week, or was it I announced I had a testicular cancer diagnosis in November. Luckily had surgery, had chemo, and, fortunate position to be in a good place and in remission, and hopefully it is all behind me. Still got to check every now and again, but luckily the worst should hopefully be behind me.
Yeah, not a fun situation. Every guy out there cringes when they hear this, but thank you for being upfront about it and maybe talking about it and looking normal.
That's the reason I spoke out about it. Really wasn't like for sympathy or anything. Like, I got through my battle, I was fine, I had amazing family, friends around me. It was more just to raise awareness that it can happen to anyone. It's a young man's cancer. Just over half the people diagnosed is between 35 and 40. And the sooner you catch it, the much easier it is to deal with, much less chemotherapy, if any. So just staying on top of it and getting checked and not being like putting it off is really the message that I would send home. And, it all still works on one ball too. So there's nothing to be worried about.
Well, I've been arguably operating with no balls for quite some time. So, hats off to you, my friend. Let's segue to Dan down in the Ozarks. Dan, welcome back to the show. You always come up big with your locations.
Yeah, beautiful. Once the weather warms up, Ozarks is where you want to be, Matt. And let me just echo what you just said. It's awesome to hear Alex's story, and obviously, first and foremost, glad that he is healthy and fighting through this. But the awareness that this generates hopefully will not only see Alex through it, but see other young men through it as well. So thanks to Corbs for that, and good to see you fighting fit, brother. Good
stuff. Dan, I didn't realize you were that short or that they were that tall, those actors.
They're standing, I'm sitting, Matt. This is my friend Darlene Snell and Wyatt Langmore, the new power couple in the Ozarks.
Spoiler alert.
Season 3, episode 6. Yeah, fast forward. Get your finger ready because you don't want to watch these two. I think he was functioning on multiple balls there, Corbs.
Fingers and balls. They're the topics of what we have today. And you need your fingers to play virtual MLR, don't you, Dan?
You do. All your thumbs. All your thumbs seems to be the go-to, fingers and thumbs. But yeah, it's still cranking along, Matt. We're in the hardware stage now. So the playoffs are in full swing, and it's been fun to watch. Unfortunately for Bryan, his Toronto boys come, I believe, dead last. Or second last, sorry. The Free Jacks are even worse. So,
Well, Bryan, when you're good on the pitch, there's a reason. You're not home playing video games, right?
That's right. They're just saving it for next year. See you next year. MLR 2021 champions right here.
And you don't want to have to keep going out and chipping ice off the transformer.
That too, I guess. Sled dogs, ice to chip off. It's rough up here. That's why those forwards are so good.
And I want to thank you for wearing the toque last week. Let's get to it, Dan. There was a lot of drama. I noticed a few things right off the bat. You had San Diego going up against
Free Jacks.
Yes. And I noticed Eric Thompson showing some class. wearing the collared shirt, whereas Ollie is sitting there in a T-shirt.
Yeah, his dad, Alex Maggleby, is going to be cross at him. He may miss out on supper tonight up at the chalet? What did we agree on? The Maggleby Chalet or the estate up there?
Estate.
Near Dartmouth. So, yeah, it'll be a rough night for young Ollie Maggleby tonight.
All right, so, Alex, what's been your favorite part of the virtual MLR?
I think it was the first week when I made my picks, and I went with Rugby 20 sort of metrics of who had the better teams, and it pretty much seemed every result went the opposite way. So I don't know how some people are losing with the teams differences going on there, but that's kind of what shocked me, is that how much, like, you'd think if you're entering the tournament, you'd be on the money, but there's this definite skill gap between some teams in this.
Yeah, there's definitely a skill gap, and there's been some good exchanges. But Dan, you talked about how, as a 10-year-old, you learned not to put shoe polish in your eye.
Yeah, I thought that the black under the eyes of NFL players was shoe polish, but apparently it's not. And so got my entire rugby team when we were 10 for our first night game to put shoe polish under their eyes, and got a little too close to the eyes. So we had a group of 10-year-olds crying, and then we went out there and we got spanked. Shoe polish didn't work, Matt. Yeah,
touching. But we're really getting behind on time here, guys. So let's get to the nitty gritty. And Bryan, I want to hit you with this one first. In virtual MLR, would it be McKenzie or Lutz?
I don't even know what that question is. I don't even know what you're asking me right now. So I'll say McKenzie by default.
This is one of the greatest rivalries that we never would have had. We never would have had this rivalry without the virus. Dan, educate the kid from Canada.
Yeah, Jamie McAdoo McKenzie. I tell you, I don't know if he's married or not, but if he's not, get on it, because he's husband material. He is an outstanding dude. And then Tian Donuts Lutz down there in Houston. A little round town for an inside center in the modern game, but a little bit of a throwback to the halcyon days of the more robust center pairings.
But again, we wouldn't have these rivalries. We wouldn't have these, without this, right? Alex, I think perhaps we can finagle it so that the champion of this competition faces off against Alexander Corbisiero.
If they give me a console, I'm in.
I mean, how much prep time how much training camp are you gonna need, Alex?
2 days.
Is that like 24?
I
7?
played a lot of rugby 08 and the other ones before, so I'm backing myself to pick it up quick.
You're like Rocky,
and I get obsessed with things easy, so I reckon I could sit there for 48 hours and get pretty good and then throw it down.
As the self-appointed MLR virtual commissioner, Corbs, I think I can make this happen. We actually have Jonathan Abrams, the safety for the now the Las Vegas Raiders, coming on later this week. So he's going to play a player. So we are doing the influencer round coming up, and I don't think there's any bigger influence in the world of social media than Alexander.
I'm in, mate. I'm in.
I'll make it happen.
Yeah, you know what? This is it's all karma. It's all coming together because today, for instance, we have the virtual commissioner of Major League Rugby, but we also had earlier today the real commissioner of Major League Rugby, George Killebrew. And this is I'm going to get emotional again, guys. This whole thing. All right. Let's move along, okay? Bryan, you're shaking your head in disgust down there. I know this isn't PBS.
I really feel like Steve Lewis is missing out on this episode, I have to say.
Fantastic. All right. We got to take a quick break, but we're going to come back, and we're going to get down to some real Major League Rugby, not the virtual stuff. And that's okay, too. But we're going to give our best Tighthead, hooker, and loosehead in the abbreviated season. Don't go away.
If you're in New York City and want to watch some great rugby, have some great food, and some great times, go to the world's best rugby pub, the Pig and Whistle on West 36th Street.
Back. Matt McCarthy in Midtown Manhattan, Dan Power in Colorado or the Ozarks. Brian Ray up in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and down in San Diego, Mr. Alexander Corbisiero. Gentlemen, we are now charged with picking our best loosehead, hooker, and tighthead, and there is no better person on the planet to get us started when we're talking about the front row than Alex Corbisiero. Alex, start us off with your loosehead.
So, I think if you were just going by on-paper credentials, how do you look over the beast? But if you're looking on MLR credentials, which is what I gave my award on, I actually went with Chance Wingluski. He is just very all-round good loosehead in the making. I love his low chop in defense. His ability to almost get on that single knee shot takedown and chop momentum down, I think, is fantastic. His work rate, he can play 80 minutes. His scrum is very good. He can carry. I think he's probably my sort of all-round pick as the best sort of week in, week out loosehead who's put their credentials on the field in MLR.
Just for the folks at home, because we do have to test we have to do some investigative journalism. Have you been down in Atlanta as a scrum consultant at all?
No, I haven't. If anywhere, I've spoken to a few other teams, which I was tempted to be biased and pick someone that I coached. But I strayed away, and I just felt that for me is the right call. I think he's probably in the top 3 best US looseheads at the moment, maybe 4, but he's probably in my mind the best playing in the MLR.
Integrity, that's what makes you Alexander the Great, because I certainly would have been tooting my own horn. Speaking of tooting his own horn, let's go to Brian Ray, who only toots Canadian horns on this show. Putting the pressure on you, who's your loosehead?
I'm going to surprise you, actually. I'm going to go with James Rushford from Rugby United New York. I'm going pure MLR for him. I just thought he missed those Vegas games, but when he came back, he made up for it. He's one of those guys who gets away with a lot, but hey, it's only cheating if you get caught.
Just when I think I have you figured out, you go and do something like that. You're an amazing man. Daniel, who's your guy?
Well, unlike Brian, I'll be loyal to the Commonwealth and pick a Canadian-based player. Shame on you, Brian. And I've actually gone, and I know we played a little tight head as well, but I'm going Richie Asiata. If the season would have wound on, he probably would have been first picked in the all-star team in the front row. Outstanding carrier of the ball, solid defensive. The question over the scrum with Morgan Mitchell departing was there, and I think he really anchored that scrum down well for the Arrows. No surprise that they were 4-1 before we shut up shop. I really was impressed with Asiata. Hopefully back next year, Brian. I don't know if you've got the scoop on that, but I'd like to see a full season from Richie Asiata.
Maybe I'll give you a little wink.
So I think that's verified. That's vetting as far as I'm concerned in this league. Yeah. So yeah, and you mentioned him earlier this season when we were talking in the other studio for Rugby Wrap Up. You picked him.
Yeah, I like him a lot. I really do. I think he's young, just super dynamic. A big engine, like Corb said with Chance Wingluski down there. You're seeing these front rowers with these big engines now who, when asked to play 80 minutes, can play a quality 80 minutes of rugby. So the evolution of the rugby player, it just gets more and more exciting.
Yeah, and he's mobile and he's dynamic. I got no beef with you, but I'm going to go, guys. You may have heard of this gentleman. He won a World Cup in this calendar year at prop, and I'm going to go with none other than Tendai Matawaria. Got to take him.
All 3 of your choices were in my thoughts. Rochford was a close number 2 for me, and the Beast's only real asterisk for me was that he didn't really have a tight head in this league, and if you don't have that, it doesn't really matter how good a loosehead you are. And so he got put in reverse a few times. Not really his fault, but I guess winning a World Cup in the same season you play in the MLR, I wouldn't argue with that pick.
Yeah, but again, getting back to the Coach of the Year conversation that we had last week, he didn't play that often for Old Glory, and still 4-1 out of the gate. Great coaching job.
Thank you.
Hooker, first person that comes to mind for me is Dan Power. So, Dan, why don't you start us off with your choice at hooker?
Yeah, I was short on cash at the time, Matt. I've told you that numerous times. You don't have to keep bringing that up. I, as you know, diehard Gilgroniac, saying my prayers, I eat my vitamins every day. And I've gone for the hooker from the Gilgronis, Tian Erasmus. who is a bit of a try-scoring machine for Austin this year, and really liked the way he moved around open field, solid in the lineouts, solid in the scrums, but great ball carrier as well. Plus, I've got to give my Gilgronis some love. So I've gone Tian Erasmus as my number 2.
Great pick. I'm going to throw you guys off a little bit, and I'm going to give you my pick. A guy who is chosen as the man to go into a dark alley with, full of thugs, by 2 teammates, and he's got a great mullet to boot. I'm going with Andrew Quattrin of your Toronto Arrows, Bryan. Solid player, Rugby World Cup under his belt. He's the pride of the Aurora Barbarians, the Laurier Golden Hawks, and the Ontario Blues, aside from Rugby Canada. He's a thug at that position.
Fine choice indeed. Hard to argue that he's a class player. And similarly, Mr. Erasmus, also a good player. There's lots of good hookers actually going around this year. But I'm going to go with the abrasive Argentine Diego Fortuny from the Houston Sabercats. I thought he was absolutely phenomenal, especially against the Arrows coming off the bench. And just in every game, I thought he was a force. They're their best forward. So that's who I'm going with, Fortuny.
Alex, a hooker's only as good as his prop, right?
Penn's not anymore, mate. The hookers these days are almost like another back row, really. And then they just have to scrum and throw as well. Like, positions really evolved from that just chunky dude that could scrum and hit his lineouts. It's an unbelievable position. And I think MLR does have quite a few ones. My honest call, I would have gone Quattrin, but you've already picked him. So I kind of let him have his moment. And I'd probably say my number 2 is the one and only the Butcher, Dylan Fawcett. Mr. Consistent, physical, good ball carrier, good darts, great scrum, maul game, has an eye for the try line as well. For me, he is my pick at hooker.
No argument here. I always pick Dylan.
Yeah.
So I figured I'd pick somebody else.
I really rate Quattrin. I think he has a very high ceiling in just MLR, but I think rugby in general. I think there's a lot he's still very young. There's a lot to be seen from him. I was very impressed getting to watch him live and speaking to some of the coaching staff at the Arrows as well, how highly they spoke of him. And Kingsley Jones, when I spoke to him down in Vegas, said that guy's the future of the Canadian hooker jerseys. So kind of turned my eye to him immediately. So him or Fawcett, I'm happy with. I think everyone's pick is solid because there's good hookers in this league.
Yeah, that's a great thing. And guys, we are starting to run out of time, so we're going to have to pick up the pace a little bit. Let's pick our tight heads. Bryan, why don't you start us off?
Okay. I'm going to go with Cole Keith, going with the Arrows this time. 22 years old. I thought he was in the form of his life. Really impressive showings in the scrum, especially that game against ATL. Really dominated that game. So I'm going to go with the young fella.
Dano?
Yeah, I'm going versatility again. Played a bit of tight head and loose head this year. I'm going to go with Val Lilo. Out of the Rugby Wilderness by the Houston Sabercats. Didn't know what to expect, but I was really impressed with him down there for Houston. I called him against Colorado in the opening round, and he didn't disappoint me as the season progressed as well.
I'm going to go with Paul Mullen, San Diego, who stepped in to fill Patty Ryan's shoes, and he was on the show, so he gets that consideration.
Yeah, I think Paul Mullen, to me, is by far the best scrummaging, I think, in the MLR right now. I think he fit in San Diego well. Maybe not quite as dynamic as Paddy Ryan around the field, but it really anchored that scrum. And San Diego, a team that are blessed with athletes across their board, so wasn't too big a drop for them. Someone who kind of under the radar, I really like Dino Waldron. I think, Nola's scrum had a lot of trouble last year. Tighthead was a tough position for them to really, anchor down. They brought him in. I didn't coach him, but I do, have worked with Nola before. And I think I was pretty impressed with him. And I think, he's got a high ceiling because I like what he can do in the loose as well. I think he has a bit more all round than maybe Mullen, but I think Mullen's scrum right now, I would say, is more dominant.
Yeah, getting back to last year, you hit the nail on the head for Nola. Everybody was saying, or a lot of people were saying, maybe it was the fact that they had the home games and then they started to trail off, but it was the front row issues. Ben Tar went.
Yeah, once they lost Tar, their season became uphill trying to win games instead of just a level playing field to play, because the amount of penalties and pressure it was putting them under made it, it was a credit to how decent a rugby team they were elsewhere that they were still even chasing for the playoffs at the end.
All right, guys, we're basically out of time, but as I mentioned earlier, we did get to speak to George Killebrew. Seems like a pretty cool guy. Seems like there's some exciting stuff going on. But Alex, this is something that you can speak to more than the rest of us. How cool is it that they paid the player contracts out?
I think it's pivotal in the future of the MLR and the ability to bring players back in next year. I think it will be when people look back, if the MLR makes it 5-10 years down the line, that decision there will be a thing people look back as a pivotal moment that helps secure its longevity in the long run. I think just in the short term, the decency, the respect to look after these players that are already sacrificing a lot to be in this competition. It's not easy to make a living playing in the MLR, but to secure that and really secure sort of people coming back next year, I think it's huge.
And when you are playing next year for either Vegas or Los Angeles, will this be the thing that pushed you over the edge to get you back in?
Yeah, probably. That and the barrels of cash that come in the mail, either or.
There you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Alex Corbisiero is not against coming back and playing rugby, which is
4 barrels of cash.
4 barrels of cash. Just
that's basically the fine print.
All right. And the fine print tells us that we are out of time, my friends. But again, I want to thank you for your time and your patience. I wish you and yours nothing but safety and health during this viral crisis. And on that note, on behalf of Mr. Dan Power in Denver, Colorado, Mr. Bryan Ray in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and Mr. Alex Corbisiero down in San Diego, I'm Matt McCarthy in Midtown Manhattan, and we're all talking Major League Rugby, and we're all signing off right now. Be safe, everybody.
Knock on. Scrum Blue.
Please hit that YouTube subscribe button, follow us on all social media platforms, and sign up for our weekly newsletter.